My name is Jason. I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank Gary for asking me to come out tonight and everybody for coming out on this snowy night. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. In my mind, I got into AA about 3.5 years ago. And it was the first time I entered the rooms, and I was really not that committed at all. But it was the first step towards, I guess, a life of sobriety. And it was a Monday night. It was like first week that I started in AA, and it was a Monday night meeting. I came here, and it was on step 2. And the gentleman who was speaking, I can't remember his name, he said to me, or he said to the group that step 2 is pretty much like to him was the most important step. And at the time, I didn't really understand it because I didn't know anything about AA. I didn't know anything about 12 steps. I was just there showing up to appease my wife at the time. So that being said, when I think about step 2, it ultimately, to me, is the most important step as well. And I'll tell you why as I progress through the story. So I grew up in a town called Lorain, Ohio. It's a suburb about 45 minutes west of Cleveland, right on Lake Erie. So I grew up right on the lake. Like literally my house was here. You cross the street and Lake Erie was right there. So I was constantly on the lake as a kid. My mother had me when she was 15. My dad was 17. So it was a little bit of a rocky upbringing, to say the least. I have 2 sisters. One's 1 year younger than me. The other one's 2 years younger than me. They were both given up for adoption. I was raised by my great-grandmother from the time I was 5, and they were given up for adoption at 4 and 3. My mom was, by the time she was 16, she was a drug addict, alcoholic. My father was a drug addict as well. His drug of choice was crack cocaine and alcohol. My mom was alcohol and pills. And that's kind of how my life started off. So, being raised by a 70-year-old lady, is much different than having two parents in the home. I didn't have to ask for a lot as a kid. My grandmother, we weren't poor by any means. We weren't necessarily middle class, but we weren't dirt poor by any means. But throughout my childhood, there was just a lot of letdown. Is my mom would call and say, "Oh, I'm coming to pick up Jason," or my dad would call and say, "I'm coming to pick you up." And 6, 7 years old, you're out by the front door just waiting for him to come, and no one ever comes. That's the life of an addict. They live spontaneously and sporadically. They don't have control over their lives, and as a 6 and 7 year old, you don't know how to handle that. So there was a lot of childhood trauma. I mean, when I was a kid, because I was being raised by my great-grandmother, who was so old, I was shuffled around a lot as a kid. I've got 7 aunts, 1 uncle. My mom had me when she was 15, and all my aunts, all 7 of them had kids before they were 15 and 16 years old. So it's kind of like a cycle where I'm from. All my aunts and stuff were on Section 8. My mom was on welfare. We grew up on welfare, Section 8. So it was, it was just that kind of scene. If you know anything about it, I'm sure you do. Some of you do. So, I spent nights, a week over at my aunt's house, sleeping on floors, seeing drugs, seeing alcohol, seeing, sexual events between 2 adults that 9, 10-year-olds shouldn't see. That was a lot of my early childhood. I remember one time my dad came to pick me up. I was probably 9 or 10. And when you do crack cocaine, it's a mentally addictive drug. It's not a physically addicted drug. Alcohol is a physically addicted drug. You can die from it. You can quit smoking crack cocaine. It's just a mental addiction. So my dad would think that it was okay to take me around to drug houses and things like that. But I remember the story. I was 9 years old, and I had to go over to my dad's house. He was living in the basement of my grandmother's house, and he took me to a drug house, and I stayed outside for 3 hours. And I was just in the back of a car, 9 years old, and I was just terrified out of my life. You don't ever think about how stuff like that affects you until you become an adult and you start dealing with things that you do, the problems that you face in life. So that was like, a lot of my early childhood. When I was like 15 years old is when, I started to pretty much become rebellious and started to do alcohol and marijuana for the first couple times. A lot of people will tell you, I remember the first time that I had my first drink of alcohol. I can't remember. I don't have a clue when it was. I remember it was around 15. I was way into marijuana before I was into alcohol. But, it started around 15, 16 years old, going out with friends, hanging out. At that point in time, my grandmother died when I was 17. So those last 2 years, 15 and 16, I really started to be disruptive around the house, be disruptive in the neighborhoods, hanging out with the wrong crowd, hanging out with people I probably shouldn't have been hanging out with. Just basically getting in a little bit of trouble, getting arrested, not getting thrown in jail for long periods of time or anything like that, but just in trouble. I started selling a little bit of weed, things of that nature. 17, I'm out running the streets. The one good thing is that my dad always gave me was he's got a tremendous work ethic. Like the Hembry bloodline, like my dad's side of the family, they've got this amazing work ethic where they're nonstop workaholics. So even though he was a crack addict, he was a functioning drug addict. He had a house, he had cars, he had basically everything you could think somebody would have in life. It's just he was a drug addict. And so, when I was 17, my grandmother fell ill with cancer, and it was probably a month and a half. She was in and out of the hospital, and then out of nowhere she died. I remember distinctly the day that she was in the hospital. The day that she passed away, we all came to the hospital, and everybody was there, and my mom was there, and my mom was so intoxicated off of Oxycontins. She was just nodding out all over the place in the waiting room, and I'm just like, at that time you're 17 years old, you're like the world, you know what I mean? You're just mad at everything. You're mad at how it is, and so at that point in my life, I really decided, because we sit in this room. Let me digress for a second. We sit in this room, and everybody in here has struggled with addiction, whether it be drugs or alcohol. I've struggled with addiction my entire life. I just became an alcoholic later in my life. I've been an addict since I was born. My mom's an addict. My dad's an addict. My grandmother was an alcoholic. It's addiction runs in my bloodline. So at that point in time in my life, when my grandmother died, I was pretty lost. I had lost my mom and my dad at the same time. It was the only person that had ever been there for me in my entire life was gone. So I was really nobody's going to tell me anything. So I had a choice: move in with your mom, who was living right outside the projects with her longtime boyfriend, who, I've known my entire life, but they don't have a pot to piss in, excuse my French. Or moving with my dad, who was a functioning drug addict. I had 1 year of high school left. I'm like, all right, let's see what we do. Move with my dad, right? So I moved with my dad. I started really getting into selling drugs. And I got caught at school with a quarter pound of weed when I was 17. And it was probably 2 months after my grandmother passed away, my great-grandmother. And I was supposed to get expelled. I got caught with another kid. Fast forward past that, and I was able to go back to school. But from that point on, I decided it might be time to get my act together. And I was able to, at 18 years old, turn my addiction into an addiction towards success. And from the time I was 18, I graduated. I went to a vocational school in 11th and 12th grade. And I barely skated by and graduated high school. And I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to go to culinary school. And because I realized I had been cooking for 2 years, I realized I had a knack for it. I was really good at it. I'm an artist at heart. I like to paint. I like to draw. I can sculpt. I can pretty much do anything. Actually, a funny story how I got into culinary arts. I'll take you back for a second. I was in 10th grade. I was in art class, period 1, period 2, study hall. I took advanced art and art 1 in the same year. I was the first kid in my school to ever do that, right? So like three of my classes were in art. And so that year we signed up to go to vocational program, and I hated high school. I was a stoner. And so I hated high school. I'm like, man, I don't want to be here. I want to go to vocational program, you know? So I signed up for like law enforcement, auto mechanics, 2 things like for guys, you know, they say in law enforcement you'd be able to shoot a gun maybe. I'm like, yeah, I can do that, you know? So I go, long story short, I don't get accepted to auto mechanics or law enforcement. I get accepted to culinary arts. I show up to school the first day of my 11th grade year, and this guy, we're in this classroom, and he's got this white jacket on. He's about 5'6", and he's going on and on and on about food. And I'm high out of my mind. I have no idea what this guy's talking about. Mind you, I grew up with 8 women. I've never even seen a man in the kitchen. So he's talking about food and this and that and the other, and he goes, "Is there any questions?" And I raise my hand. I'm like, "Yeah, where's all the art supplies?" And he's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "This is culinary arts. It's cooking." I was like, "I thought it was an art class." I dead serious thought it was an art class. This guy turned out to be my mentor, my first mentor in culinary arts. He retired 3 years ago. He still told that story to every incoming class that came into. I ended up going 2 weeks, and then went back to tried to go back to my home school, and then stuck it out. So, but sorry to digress. But back to where I was like, I was ready to make a commitment to myself in life. Now I was still, partying on the weekends and still smoking weed and stuff. So I landed a job at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Cleveland. So that was like the first life-changing moment of my career. I had worked in like the private sector before. I was running independent restaurants. So I got this break with the Ritz-Carlton, and I just was addicted to work, like totally addicted. I would work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. Anybody called off, I'd pick up their shift. My addiction through and through, from the time I woke up to the time I went to sleep, was success and work. And I was able to carry that for several years. I worked for the Ritz-Carlton for about 7.5 years. And from that point, I had moved up. 2 years into my career, I moved up to become a sous chef. At 26, 28, I was executive sous chef, which is unheard of in that company. At 29, I left the Ritz-Carlton and became an executive chef at Glen Eagles Country Club in Delray Beach, Florida, which is a $26 million operation. $7 million in food and beverage. I had a staff of 65 underneath me. Sorry, I can't get comfortable. Staff of 65 underneath me. It was just my dream job, and I was grinding. And I probably drank once every couple weeks, But when I drank, they used to call me Double-Fisted Henry. Because it was like you have all this pent-up energy throughout the week, all this stress of work, all this keeping it together, because I was so focused and so addicted to being the best chef at such a young age that I had no time for anything else. So those few times every couple of weeks when I had hair, my hair down, and I'd go out, and I'd turn it up, it was Hennessy straight up, like, I was really getting it. So I lived like that for a little bit. Then I met my wife. At that point in time, I'm probably 30. Actually, sorry. Before I went to Glen Eagles Country Club, I met my wife at the Ritz-Carlton. She was the assistant spa director. I was actually engaged to be married. I was actually married. I just got married. And she was engaged to be married. Yeah, so this is a good one for you. So we're working at the Ritz-Carlton together, right? And I meet this girl, and I'll go through it quickly. We end up talking, and we end up hitting it off, and I become really friendly with this girl. And I'm like, telling her about my life. She tells me about her life. She's from Philly. And I'm from Cleveland originally. We're in Jupiter, Florida. Palm Beach area is where we're at the time. And so we're there, we hit it off, and then the next thing you know, her fiance cheats on her a week before the wedding. And I'm like, I had been with the woman, my wife at the time, for 7 years. And what happened was during that relationship, I was so embedded into work and so addicted to work, we just grew apart and became friends. We were like roommates. And at the end of the relationship, the last year, I decided to marry her because she had been sticking around for 7 years and I was successful now. She had been with me when I came from the ghetto and I had nothing, I had not a pot to piss in, and she was with me through all that. So I just kind of took the leap. Well, once I met my current wife, I realized, wait a minute, I'm not happy. This is not what life was supposed to be about, I was miserable in my personal relationship. So we ended up, fast forward, we get together, we get married. So I meet her parents, or her dad. Her mom and dad are separated. This is a good one. It's a crazy story, sorry. Her dad and her mom are from Philadelphia, but her dad lives in Jupiter, Florida. So her dad is a 35-year concrete guy in the union in Philly. He's retired. He had beet cancer, stage 4 lung cancer, or throat cancer. So I meet the guy. He's like a health nut. He's like working out 6 days a week. He's like a guy's guy. He looks like Ron, but acts completely different than Ron. He's just like you think of like a union guy, concrete, raspy voice, like a man's man, and I became really close with him, and he was the only person in my entire life that I was, after, a couple of years of developing a relationship with him, and then we had our first child. He was the only person in my life that I could ever count on or call on. My entire life I spent on my own. Nobody gave me nothing. There was no handouts. There was never once I could call somebody and say, I'm late on a car payment. Like, can I get some money? Or I don't have any money to pay my rent. It was all me. There was never any help. So he was the only person, not that I ever asked him for help, but he was the only one that I could ever call on. And so I had developed this father-son relationship with him, and it was just the most amazing thing in the world. We are owning our second home. We're getting ready to buy our third house. We go under contract. It's our dream home. 5 bedrooms, 3 bath, 12 doors down from our current house, in a gated community, golf course, restaurant, 3-car garage. We were coming to take a trip up to Philly to see my wife's sister's second child being born. My wife was 8 months pregnant with our second child. We were all on a plane, and my father-in-law died on the airplane. He had a massive heart attack on the airplane. We got on the airplane with him and got off the airplane without him. So that was when my life changed forever. From that moment on, I was never the same person. Before that, I was a grab him by the balls type of guy. Like, no matter what, there was nothing that scared me. When I look you in the face and I tell you there was nothing in life that scared me. There was nothing. And now everything scared me. When I tell you that you get on an airplane with somebody who you love, who you have a relationship with that you've never had before in your life, you spent the last 6 years every single day with this person that you trust, and you get off the airplane and they're no longer a part of your life. It's a tragedy to call it a tragedy, honestly. And from that moment on, I started suffering from severe anxiety. I believed I was going to have a heart attack. I thought I was going to die. One day I was at work and I drove myself to the hospital, and I literally crawled into the hospital on my hands and knees, and they picked me up, put me on a gurney, and rushed me right back because I swore I was having a heart attack. And doctors came in, hooked me up to all the machines, ran all these tests, and said, "You're totally fine, bro. You're having a panic attack." And I'm like, there's no way like a panic attack could create like real chest pain in my chest. Like, I literally thought I was dying. I'm having a heart attack. Like, something's wrong. So we ended up being stuck up here for like almost 3 weeks because he's from here. We wanted to bury him here. And now I'm a big time chef in South Florida, in Palm Beach. Everybody knows me in Palm Beach. I know all the famous chefs down there. I'm running this major operation My career is at the pinnacle of its career. I'm young. I'm 31, 32, 33 maybe. And I tell my wife, I'm like, look, if it seemed like we kept getting stuck up here, you know what I mean? So like, I'm like, all right, well, if you really want to move up here and be close with your family, because I grew up without a mom and dad. My sisters were adopted. I don't have any family really. So I was like, if you want to, I'll call my recruiter and we'll move to Philadelphia and be with your family, because this was a tragedy that rocked us to the core. Like life in South Florida was no longer going to be the same anymore with her dad not there. You know what I mean? So I called my recruiter. She told me, yeah, I want to move. 2 weeks later, I was interviewing for the executive chef position at Doylestown Country Club here. Got the job, moved up here, and that's when the drinking really started to progress. I took this job. My wife had our second child. She is going to bed every night at 7 o'clock. I'm working 75 hours a week because it's a new place, new establishment. It's a dump. It hasn't been renovated in 30 years. The staff is a mess. Like, I'm a guy who's coming from a Ritz-Carlton background, super duper high end. Like, I've got my hands full with this place. So how it starts is every night I work 12, 16 hours a day. I come home, I'm like, where's the wine at? You know what I mean? I'm like, and it was never just a couple glasses. It was always like, where's the bottle? Let's kill the bottle. So that's how it went for like a year or so. 3 years into it, that's when the vodka came around. When the vodka comes around, that's when we start to get problems, Then it was the wine tastings at work. Now I've got the place on autopilot. I'm 3 years in, it's on autopilot. Everybody's happy. The members are happy. Jason's the best chef. I mean, we got this guy from South Florida. He's amazing. I got my executive sous chef from South Florida, my right-hand man from South Florida. Now we're both up here running this little country club. It's like my own little play field. You know what I mean? I can sexually harass the women if I want. I can drink on the job if I want. I'm just this big-time dipshit, And I've got it all underneath my thumb, right? And so that's how my life went for a couple years. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, it really went downhill. You took a guy who was for 19 years, worked every single holiday, every night, every weekend, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And you're like, all right, you're working Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30. So that just means happy hour starts at 4:30, Monday through Friday and in through the weekend. So the drinking started to progress, all right? It got worse. So COVID kicks up, so now I had been drinking every single day for at least 5 years already. Let's call a spade here. You know what I mean? I had already been in and out of AA, I had been hiding the drinking for several years from the people around me, my wife. It was all a big secret. Everybody around me thought that I wasn't drinking, but I was drinking at work. And I was drinking when everybody went to sleep. So me creating this toxic work environment ultimately, didn't last. I mean, I eventually was forced to quit because I was going to get fired for drinking on the job and sexually harassing women. And, it all comes along with it. And that's kind of how I left that place. So, sorry, I just want to digress here for a second. So, it was a lot of back and forth on the rocks with my wife at that time. Could you imagine coming home and being like, all right, now mind you, I had been so successful for so many years, and I got to walk in and tell my wife I just resigned from the country club. I'm making $150,000 a year. Like, what the hell are you going to resign for? Well, why'd you resign? Well, because they said that I sexually harassed somebody. You tell that to your wife, you've got 3 children with. Yeah, not so good, right? So that was rough, to say the least, So we're going through it. Now I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm spinning out of control, right? I'm like, oh boy. So I'm looking for a job. Now, There's not a lot of premier country clubs in this area, right? So I'm like, where do I go from here? So I get a job interview at this place in Telford Country Club, right? In the meantime, I'm like, I need some sort of income, so I got to figure out what I'm going to do. Like, what am I going to do with my life? And I'm like, all right, so I have this business opportunity that had been on the back burner for like a couple years, this small little cafe inside this office building. So I'm like, all right, I call the owner and I'm like, I start getting the wheels rolling on that. I'm like, if I can't get another job, I'll just open up this cafe. Everything will be all right, right? You know, I got it all under control. So I don't get the job because I go in for the tasting. I had 2 phone interviews, 1 person face-to-face interview. I go in for the tasting. I'm getting ready to get the job offer. I know I got it in the bag, and I get ghosted by this general manager. I'm like, what's going on, you know? And so I call the general manager, and he won't respond to me. And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? Well, it turns out I heard through the grapevine that my old GM blackballed me at all the major country clubs around here. So I'm like, all right. So I take the leap and I open up the cafe. Now, I had wanted to open up a restaurant my entire life. I mean, any chef, any culinarian, you know, that's their dream, is to open up a restaurant. I had been tremendously successful my entire career. You're talking to a guy that was successful at the Ritz-Carlton. I was running a $7 million food and beverage operation down to the penny. And when I tell you I failed beyond misery, I failed beyond misery. You know why? Because instead of drinking at 2:30, I started drinking at 6:30 in the morning. I was so miserable, so broken as a human being, so demoralized as a human. I mean, me and my wife hadn't had sex in a year. I was addicted to pornography. I was a raging alcoholic. I owned a failing business. When I moved here and sold my house and moved here and took the job for $150,000, I had $120,000 in my savings account. Now I'm a raging alcoholic, flat broke, in debt $50,000, and I'm lost. I have nowhere to go. So I continue this vicious cycle. My life just gets worse and worse and worse. And during this time, I'm in and out of AA. And I think I want to quit. I think I want to try to quit. I think I want to get everybody off my back so I can figure out a way to drink without anybody caring about me destroying my life, right? And at this time, I'm starting to kind of figure out, like, well, you know, like, where the hell did this go south? You know what I mean? I'm like, what happened? Like, you know, like we all do. You look back and you're like, this guy rose to success all the way to here with no help at all, you know, and then now you're down here. And like all these people that I grew up around who are like, I'm not going to say losers, but just like, you know, like didn't do anything with their lives. I'm no better than them. I'm worse off than them. And so I ended up I decided, you know, I was in such debt and such bad shape. I'm like, you know, I'm lying to my wife saying I'm not drinking even though she knows I'm drinking. And I'm like, I got to get a job. I'm so far in debt. I was like, I got to get out of it. I got to do something, right? So I'm like, all right. So I apply for a job. I get this corporate chef gig where I'm still at today, two and a half years later. Thank God. So I decided to myself, I'm like, this is one of those very short stints when I was in AA and stuff. I'm like, it's 2.5 years ago. I'm like, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to be sober, right? So for the first 30 days, I didn't take a drink at work. I didn't take a drink at home. And I made it like 37 days, I think. And that was the longest stint I ever had in sobriety. And then I started drinking on the job again. And then it was every day, every single day. When I tell you the vicious cycle that I was living, I was sleeping in a separate bedroom anyways from my wife because I get up at 4:30 in the morning to go to my job. And that was just the excuse to stay away and hide so I could get drunk and inebriated every night. So I would wake up in the morning, crawl out of bed, drag myself to work, and I'd be watching the clock like this, waiting for 8:45 so I could leave, so I could go to the liquor store, waiting for it to be open at 9 o'clock. Pull up to the liquor store, walk in, 2 pints, New Amsterdam plain, please. They knew me, right? Couple of minis, maybe if I'm feeling frisky. So pound the pint, go right back to work, right? Take a little nap around like 1:30 in my office. I had it down to a science. Get out of work, sober up enough, just enough to get home. Can't smell it on me. She can smell it on me. Do the thing with the kids. Shit, I was an assistant football coach. I'm inebriated half the time, right? I got 7 and 8-year-old kids out there, and I'm inebriated on the sidelines. Get home, bathe the kids, cook dinner, put them to bed, wait for everybody to go to sleep. Where's the second pint? To the face. 9 o'clock at night, 8:30 at night. I'm only getting drunk for 2 hours, an hour and a half. Then I black out and go to sleep and wake up and do it all over again. And it's just this nasty, vicious cycle that I was stuck in. And every day when I went to that liquor store, I knew it wasn't right. Just like we all did. Knew it wasn't right. But guess what? That wasn't bottom for me. It wasn't. So I'll get close to it. Let's get to it. I was a flag football coach for my son. It was summer. We went undefeated. When I tell you I'm pretty dedicated as a parent, even though I was a raging alcoholic, I'm still pretty dedicated as a parent. I could have been a lot better emotionally for my kids, controlling my emotions and being understanding during that time of my alcoholism. But I was always there, and I was always willing to be a part of their lives. So we went undefeated. Super Bowl ends up being on a Friday. Fortunately, at my job on Fridays, there's not much going on. So by 9:30, I'm belligerent drunk. And I'm excited. I'm drawing up plays, right? On the way home, I stop at the liquor store again. Because I'm like, I don't got to go home. You know, we're going to the field. Nobody's going to know I'm drunk. I show up to the field just wasted. And we lost the game, obviously. It was because of me, obviously. And it was, at that point, I thought was probably one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. You know, embarrassing myself. I never fell down or anything like that, but like my wife knew, a couple of the parents knew. You know, I was not myself. I was arguing with the refs, screaming and cursing, you know, in front of six. I was out of character, way out of character. People could tell. And at that moment, I had thought, you know, that's got to be rock bottom. You know what I mean? Like, I'm showing up at my kid's thing, like, you know, like, dude, you got to get it together, right? You know? So I'm like, my wife's like, I'm out of here. I'm leaving you. And I'm like, sorry, I'm getting a little close on time. I want to speed it up a little bit. My wife's like, I'm leaving you. And so, fast forward, I go to rehab. I'm 2 days into rehab. And I'm on detox. So during detox, you can't leave the house. Everybody leaves the house. I decided to go out front, flag down a car, and ask where the closest liquor store was. Ran to the liquor store, bought 2 pints, came back, and got inebriated drunk at rehab on the second day. And caused the biggest dramatic scene in my life. And that was rock bottom. And that was when I decided I got a serious issue with alcohol. I got a serious addiction problem. And if I don't get it fixed, I'm going to be gone forever. And it was about 2 weeks into that. You know, starting in rehab, it was really good for me because once I landed on my face, the next morning I went one by one to every single person in the house and apologized to them. And I went one by one to every person on the staff and apologized to them and asked them if they would allow me to be a part of this journey, this 30-day journey, and stay at the house and not be removed from the house. And they all accepted. And I opened my mind and my heart. And it was 2 weeks later of going through all these things that I've talked about, that I've went through in my life during this time, was when I realized when I had my connection with my higher power. And I'm going to tell you about that real quick, and then I'll give it to the floor. I was making progress as far as dealing with my wife and my personal situation. When you're in rehab, I'm sure if anybody's ever been to rehab, Probably not many of you here. But you know what I mean? Like, when you're in rehab, you're dealing with personal stuff that's going on at home that you can't be there for. And so I had been dealing with this issue with my wife about trying to get her on my side. You know what I mean? Trying to get her to understand, like, it's not a joke anymore. She doesn't believe it. I mean, I drank the second day in rehab. Who does that? And so, long story short, is I'm making this progress, and I'm making a tremendous amount of progress with my therapist. And I come downstairs after I make a phone call to her, and she just rips me. 20 minutes on the phone. Just irate, just belittling me, you know, shitting on me, pardon my French, but like just terrorizing me. And I walk out, and there's nobody outside, and I'm sitting there on a chair, and it's a cool day, it's 60 degrees outside, and I look up, and I'm looking at the trees, and I see the sun casting over the house, and I see this glow in the trees. And as I'm looking at this glow, I start to get this chill on my body, and the glow gets bright and brighter and brighter and brighter. And this chill goes down my back. And I just know at that moment in my life that something changed. And I've never been a believer in God. And I've been in these rooms dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times and heard people say it. And I've sat in that chair and that chair and that chair and mumbled under my breath that it's a crock of shit. But I can sit here and tell you that it happened to me. And that is what's changed. And during this time, it is what has allowed me to be open-minded and open-hearted enough to take this journey and to follow the steps and to get a sponsor. I was thinking about this tonight. You know, I told you guys I was a little bit nervous when I sat down. I was thinking about this tonight. It's like, when you think about, I was on my way to the city this afternoon, and I was thinking about tonight, and I'm like, man, I'm a little bit nervous. Like, I've never really told my story. I'm 5 days away from 5 months of sobriety, and I'm like, you know, I got a lot of things to talk about it, and how do I tie it into step 2 and how it relates to step 2? And in reality, it's like in the doctor's opinion. I was listening to it, and I'm thinking, like, when he says, this poor soul of a man who can make no decisions about any single thing in life, all of a sudden, miraculously can make life choices as easy as can be. And for me, that's what step 2 is about, is, you know, believing in that power that's greater than me. If I didn't have that, it's literally what everything revolves around in my life right now. I go to church on Sunday, not because I want to go to church to have a good time. It's because I want to work on my connection with God. I know for a fact that when I started this journey, I was broke as a joke. And financially, I'm doing well. I mean, you've probably heard it dozens and dozens of times, but it's the truth. And that's, you know, nobody can explain it better than yourself once you go through it. And I'll end with this. If you don't believe it, if you don't have a spiritual connection yet, just keep trying, because eventually it will happen. Whether it's in step 2, whether it's before the steps at all, like it happened for me, or whether it's when you get past step 12 and you have that spiritual encounter. But I know for a fact that this time on my journey that I have now, I will sponsor people eventually. You know, it might be 6 months from now. I might be sponsoring somebody in this room or somebody you may know, because I have that connection with my higher power. So thank you for letting me share.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.